afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome to this session on predatory journals. Let me share my screen with you and then we can get started. I think we're good to go. Let me see how many participants. Participants are still joining. Let me just give them a half a minute and then we can start. So it looks like the participants are steady now. So welcome again from my side to the session about avoiding predatory journals, a very important topic. I hope it will be interesting for you. Just before we begin, just to remind you that we are recording this session, so you are muted, but please do ask your questions. Use the Q&A section for that. And then, as I mentioned, the recording is being made, so the recording will be made available after this session. I will share the website where it will be made available in a second. Also to remind you that we are doing a series of webinars. So this is the Researcher Toolbox series. So please join us for the upcoming sessions. We have an upcoming session on the 6th of November where we'll be talking about peer review workshop. So that will be very interesting. I'll touch on peer review as well today. If you have your phone handy with you, use the QR code so that you can register for these sessions, for the upcoming sessions. As I mentioned, the recording will be made available. So this will be on the Africa Researcher Success Portal, where we promote all the upcoming webinars, but also make the resources available after the session. Right. So on to the topic of today. I'm going to talk about some of the key concepts that are important when we talk about predatory journals, and then also just touch on the origins of predatory, and then make a distinction between what are, poor or sloppy journals and those that are really predatory. And then we'll go through some of the red flags. The dilemma with using lists, white lists, black lists. We'll talk about all the dilemma around that and then come to some conclusion. Please, as we go along, add your questions to the Q&A box so that we can have some discussion. Right, so the first concept that's important in terms of understanding predatory journals is that we need to, so let me just say, when I added this image, I didn't realize it was animated, so I'm a bit surprised by that. But yes, so very importantly, understanding open access is crucial in terms of understanding predatory journals as well. So there are two main subscription models, or no, main publishing models out there. So the two of them is subscription-based. So the one is subscription-based, meaning that you submit your manuscript to a journal which is paid for by the reader. So in most cases, the subscription is paid for by libraries. So which means that your article can be read by academics whose libraries have subscribed to the journal, right? So that's the subscription-based model of publishing. And then the other option is open access, which means that the author pays upfront for the publication to be available for everybody to read after it has been accepted. So the publisher then makes your article available without any restriction after it has been accepted for publication. So it is also important to understand then, the costs involved in publishing. What are publishers basically charging for? So we will also touch on this. So the next is to look at peer review. So peer review is a very important concept also in terms of predatory. And this is the practice which basically forms the foundation of science. It entails that your paper is subjected to the scrutiny of experts to look into the methods, the data, and your findings. And this is done to ensure that you have followed scientific methods and to prevent dissemination of irrelevant findings, unwarranted claims, and unacceptable interpretations and personal views. So there are many different ways of doing peer review. No, this is not relevant at this stage. For now, it is just important to understand the concept of peer review and why this is so important within science and why this plays a role within predatory journals, right? So the third thing to take note of is, academic publishing, and what is it that academic publishers do? So if we say that there are predatory publishers out there, what are the legitimate academic publishers doing? So amongst others, they provide proper validation of scientific findings through peer review. So that's where the peer review comes in. Any legitimate or ethical academic publisher will have a peer review system. Also, they do copy editing, typesetting, proofreading, graphic design. They usually have software to detect plagiarism, or they look out for plagiarism. They do linking, so that the articles are also linked to open and accessible data sets. They ensure that it is discoverable online. They provide metadata to search engines and platforms to publicize it. They do archiving, digital preservations. They address copyright issues, author disputes, etc. So there's a lot that academic publishing does, and hence article processing cost that is involved in open access publishing, as well as then a fee related to subscription-based, which is then often paid for by the library subscription, right? So these are some of the foundation concepts that we have to keep in mind when we look into predatory. But what went wrong? So where does predatory publishing come from? And the term, as many of you will know by now, was coined by Jeffrey Beall. He's a librarian at the University of Colorado in Denver, and it dates back to 2010. When Beall noticed that there were publishers that were taking advantage of the open access system, right? So the open access system where the author pays for the article to be made available for readers without cost. So he noticed that there were, publishers that were taking advantage of this by taking articles, but not, performing any of the duties or of the roles, responsibilities that a publisher should do. So his definition for predatory, then he coined it predatory, and it was because he said that these journals prey on often unsuspecting and emerging researchers that don't have a lot of experience, and they sort of get them to submit their manuscripts for the sole purpose then of making money from these scholars, but without, performing any of the activities that are related to real publishing. So it is important to note that although Beall was the first to call out rogue publishers, but not everyone agrees with his definition and the journals that he included in his list. So it is also useful to look at other definitions. So since 2010, there's been a lot of other research being done to determine what is the merit of Beall's criteria, and then also to come up with a more universally accepted definition. The reason why Beall was why everybody was not, comfortable with his definition, is that they found that he was too anti-open access, right? So I don't have enough knowledge to really say whether that was true or not, but there were some academics or people within the academic ecosystem that thought that he was too narrowly minded around the whole concept of open access related to predatory, right? So research is still ongoing, but the most recent academic definition of predatory journals was published in November 2019 in Nature. And this was done by a group of researchers that came together for the purpose of really talking about what does predatory publishing mean, and they came out with what is now known as the Ottawa Declaration, and it reads that predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false and misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. Right. So what does all of this mean? When we talk about prioritize self-interest, it really means to make money or for profit, for the sole purpose of making money. Also at the expense of scholarship. So they publish work that has not been verified by experts, so it hasn't gone through peer review. To attract submissions, they spam, usually spam emails, or they provide misleading or false information on their websites. They basically pretend that they are legitimate journals, but they don't perform the activities related to academic publishers. Right. So this is the Ottawa Declaration. This is basically at the moment the definitive academic definition of what predatory publishing means. There are also other definitions. A non-profit organization, Think, Check, Submit, which basically provides guidance for academics in terms of publishing. So their definition is that predatory publishers or journals are those which charge authors a fee for publication with no intention of providing the expected services, such as editorial peer review in return. Charging a fee is a legitimate business model, but the publisher should be providing a good publishing service in return. Right. So this is a very clear definition as well, which is the same as the previous definition. It's just phrased a little bit differently, and I would say more simple and understandable. So this is a very clear definition of what predatory publishing is. So if you look at some of the characteristics, and I'll show you some examples from websites. So false and misleading information provided on the website is one of the common things that you will notice. So misrepresentation of the editorial board, fake impact factors, incorrect addresses, false claims of being indexed in Scopus or Web of Science. They will also, mention membership of associations. They will claim that they're doing peer review, but that will not be the case. So false and misleading information on the website. Deviation from best editorial and publication practices. So how you would notice this often is that it would be unprofessional looking web page with spelling and grammar mistakes or irrelevant text into it. So these are also red flags. Then there would be lack of transparency, such as very little information about the editorial board or how editorial decisions are made, what fees are incurred, if any, if there's peer review, how is the peer review conducted, no contact information, no details about the editors, or it would not be verifiable, right? Then there would be another, very obvious one, which most of us have experienced, is that aggressive, emails, or aggressive in the sense that there would be many emails and using language that is not really, commonly used within the academic environment. So very flattering, very inviting, very sort of commercial orientated. So, low fee for quick publishing, that kind of thing. So mentioning these characteristics, it's very important to keep in mind that these are clues, these are red flags, and it doesn't mean that if if these red flags manifest that the journal is predatory. The most important factor to identify predatory is when there is an exchange of money and there are no services that are being delivered, right? So just looking at, how some of these red flags manifest. So all of us have seen these kinds of emails where you are, it's basically a spam that you receive. Nobody knows how, the names or the email addresses are harvested from the internet. But some of their language would be able to, also give this away, especially if there's very flattering language being used. Also, if it mentions indexes, but the indexes are not recognizable, it's not Scopus or Web of Science or legitimate journal indexes. That would also, if there's no name at the end, so in the signature of the email, they would often not provide a name of a person, but just the editor or, something like that. So often you would also, it would not, the name of the journal would not match your research topic exactly. So all of these things are in the email, are red flags. And the fact for getting an email asking, if you're not a very well-known top researcher in your field, the chances are very small to receive an email from a publisher asking you for your manuscript. It's very, very unlikely. So this is another example of such an email. I think I've mentioned all of these, but also business marketing language such as discount publication charge. Right, so this is very commercial language, which you won't often find in a academic environment where you want your article to be published. So this is another example where it mentions specifically quick publication, and in this, so here you have a publication fee, which is mentioned, which is very low. This is also to attract. So there are researchers that are very keen to publish open access. So they would be interested in article processing charges that are, lower. So this is one of the ways that they attract researchers to submit their articles. So quick publication promised here, and then also immediate acknowledgement, urgent review and publication within 48 hours after payment. Right, so this is very obvious. Very obvious. So there's there's no ways, or it's extremely difficult to go through a peer review process within 48 hours. It's practically impossible. The publisher would have to first, assess what is the topic, then assess who are the possible reviewers, then reach out to the reviewers, then send them your manuscript, then wait for their responses. So this whole process takes several weeks, if not months. So in this journal, they're also mentioning indexes and abstracting services. So Google Scholar, for example, Google Scholar is not an index, it's a search engine of academic literature. So, it's not, but that's not so bad. But some of the others that are mentioned here are just not, they don't even exist, or they are not legitimate indexing services. Then next in this example, the branding is a giveaway, because this is clip art just pasted together to make up the branding of this journal, which usually a journal would have quite nice branding. I mean, journal editors are serious about what they do and how they present their academic work. So, just putting together a few clip art pictures is not what a legitimate journal would usually do. So there's also, some garbage characters here, which usually indicates that things have been copy-pasted. There's also lack of transparency, so using an acronym which is not explained as, you know, where the what the name is of the journal or the group of journals, right? So I've taken out the name of the journal, but this is a real example of a journal that exists out there. And then we have this example where we have false and misleading metrics. So this journal is claiming a specific impact factor, an ICV metric. So these are, you know, just made up numbers. They're on false metrics. This is an example. I'm not sure if it's the same journal still, but this is the scope of the journal mentioned here. So journals always have a page, a web page, where they describe their aims and their scope. And in this case, the scope is so wide that it is definitely a red flag. So it's from research paper to survey paper to a dissertation chapter to a research proposal or a synopsis or a complete PhD or master's thesis, right? So the scope is just too wide. There's no academic journal, legitimate journal that would have a scope that is so wide. They're usually very succinct in describing what type of articles or what type of papers they would like to publish, right? So on the left, you can also see that it's referring to cite factor and GIF factor. So these are not legitimate indexing services, and they basically play a little with your mind in the terms of, you know, Scopus has a site score and Web of Science has a journal impact factor. So very similar. It sounds like it could be correct because it might sound familiar, but going into it, these are not legitimate indexing services or metrics. So this is not even the end of the story. So there are other deviant forms of publication. We also get hijacked journals. So hijacked journals are quite difficult because this is when a fake journal or a predatory journal creates a website and then solicits publications, or they attract then publications to their website that is meant for the original journal. So they basically completely duplicate the journal. It looks exactly the same, but it goes to a different website and they publish it on a different website, right? This is a hijack that they use the same name and everything of the journal, but it ends up in the wrong place. Unethical publishing is always, you know, an issue also. So this is not predatory, but it's unethical, where you have excessive publication by an editorial board in their own journal or by very high intensity of authors in the same issue of a journal, for example. So this is also not, you know, where you can see that there is a preferential given to certain authors within the journal. Citation manipulation. So that is when the editorial board would, for instance, ask you to cite their journal, to cite authors in their journal, so that they can increase their metrics. This is not predatory, it's unethical. You get paper brokers, so this is very unethical. This is where you get where you have a middleman who basically sells you a name on an article. So there would be an article, it could be a real article or a fake article, but to have your name, you can pay to have your name on the article, right? So things like that. Paper brokers, and then plagiarism, language plagiarism specifically also happens often, is that when your article or published article is taken and translated and published in another journal without referencing the original article. So that's a form of plagiarism. Right, so having looked at all the things that can go wrong or that is not done in the right way, so what does a legitimate journal look like? And all of these characteristics you will, or most of them you will see on the journal website. So the aim and the scope of the journal, would be clearly demarcated on the website. A peer review system will be in place, and it will be described. The editorial board members will be subject specialists, and they will be verifiable. So there will be an indication who the editors are and where they are affiliated. The journal will be indexed by prominent indexing services like Scopus and Web of Science. There are others as well, the Director of Open Access Journals, etc. So basic editing and typesetting, quality control are performed by the journal. The copyright will be very clear. Archiving and persistent access to the articles will be one of the services that are provided, etc. So this is just a short list of some of the activities that publishers are responsible for, and which you should look out for or notice when you are searching for a journal in which to publish. These are the things that you should look out for, because they are indicators that the journal is high quality and that it is ethical and not predatory, of course. So these are important because the consequences of publishing in a predatory journal can be detrimental for individuals building an academic career. So this is something that is increasingly being checked. So when academics apply for funding, apply for promotion, apply, in recruitment processes, when there are predatory journals on the list of publications, that can have definitely a negative impact that will affect the academic career and the opportunities then for promotion, advancement, funding, etc. So if this happens recurringly within an institution, the reputation of the university or the academic institution will also become tainted. So universities, institutions also have responsibility to make sure that their academics are well informed about the importance of avoiding predatory journals. So from the Scopus point of view, what does Scopus do to address predatory journals? And we basically have three important processes that we go through. So the first is that we do curation. So curation means that every journal that is indexed in Scopus goes through a selection criteria process. So this process, I will talk about it in the next slide as well, to give you an idea of what the factors are that journals have to comply with before they are indexed in Scopus, right? So this is not where it ends, and also there's a re-evaluation process. So there are several mechanisms, algorithms running in Scopus that try to pick up any kind of activity within a journal that would be of concern. So, for instance, if there is a journal that is, just a regular journal, and suddenly the journal article number increases, and you can see that there's a specific, regional group or country authors that are publishing in that specific journal. So, any kind of outlying activity within a journal would flag the journal, and it would go through the reevaluation process. So the curation and the reevaluation process is done by an independent board, the Content Selection and Advisory Board. This is not done by the Scopus in-house team, because it is very, it's very important to make sure that you look at this from all angles and make sure that the quality of the journal is of a certain level. This is outsourced to experts within the publishing domain. So reevaluation, first curation, then reevaluation, and if a journal is found to not meet the standards of the selection criteria, we also publish a discontinuation of this, or we publish a list of all journals that have been discontinued. So this list is available in Scopus. So if you go in Scopus and outside of Scopus. So if you go within Scopus under sources, there's a list, an Excel list that you can export, and it contains all the discontinued with their dates and a reason why they have been discontinued. And this does not include journals that are discontinued for normal reasons. If the editorial board does not want to continue with the journal, it's not that kind of, it's where there was an investigation and the journal was discontinued. So this list is available in Scopus under sources, the Excel list that can be downloaded, as well as on the Scopus support page or the corporate page. You will find stringent standards. If you go to About Scopus, just follow the links until you get to stringent standards, and you will find also this list as well as all the selection criteria. So in terms of Scopus, this is regarded as in a very serious light, and we do not discontinue journal or accuse journals of being predatory unless there is very specific evidence of publication malpractice. And it is also not done by the Scopus team. We do rely on experts to make sure that the assessment that is done is accurate and fair to the publishers. Right, so just to give you an idea of what we look at when we, in terms of selecting journals for Scopus, and first there are two levels. So the first level is that the journal must be peer-reviewed, English abstracts, regular publication, just general good management of the journal, Roman script references, so it must be English references, and there must be, very importantly, a publication ethics statement. This ethics statement must not be something that was copied. So it will be looked at with a lot of scrutiny to make sure that this is the real and authentic voice of the journal in terms of how they handle publication ethics issues. So then it goes, it's actually in the second level now that it goes to the content selection and advisory board, and they look at factors like the journal policy, the quality of the content, the journal standing, the regularity, so, the issues per year, for example, the online availability, and this then also includes the quality of the website and the information provided on the website, right? So this is quite a robust selection process that the journals have to go through, and less than 40% of journals that apply for indexing make it through to being accepted to be indexed within Scopus. There's always also feedback to the journals for the reason why they have not been accepted, and through this process, as you can see, the robustness of this process, predatory journals will not make it through this process. Although I must say some of the predatory journals have become very clever, and they know what we are looking for, and hence then also the re-evaluation process, which if it slips through, then it will be definitely caught out by the re-evaluation process. Right. So in Scopus, we're also very, as I mentioned, we look for very specific evidence, because the concept of predatory journals it's defined differently, it's seen differently by different people, but we have we try to be as fair as we possibly can, and also make sure that we have evidence when we say that a journal is predatory, right? So this is not specifically from Scopus, but more or less aligned to how we also look at journals. So a journal is really regarded as, predatory, deceptive, and, many things you can call it, if any of these characteristics appear. So if there is false information about peer review, if there's false information about the editorial board, and you will not, you shouldn't be surprised, because there are journals with complete false editorial boards where real researchers, well-known researchers, are listed on editorial boards without their knowledge. So this type of thing is happens. False information. So this is definitely deceptive, and it would be regarded as predatory. False information about the location of the journal. False information about the journal's impact factor. False information about indexing services provided. So often they would mention that they are indexed in Scopus or Web of Science. If this is false, it's definitely regarded as deceptive. And then false information about the costs involved in the publishing. On the other hand, we keep in mind that not all journals have the same resources, and some of them might just not have the capabilities or the experience to put out a super duper journal out there. So you might see some of the characteristics on these websites, but if they are non-cumulative, so if only one, if the journal is only too broad in its scope, that doesn't mean it is predatory. It just probably means that the journal is not, doesn't have a lot of resources. It's not very experienced, right? So sloppiness can manifest in just, some papers being poor quality. They might not even seem academic. The interest, the scope would be too broad. They would sometimes publish journal or articles that are not completely in the scope. So it's slightly out of the scope. The website is not very informative, or it lacks important information. The journal is not indexed. So for instance, in Scopus, the journal has to exist for more than 2 years, and it has to comply with all the selection criteria to be indexed. So not being indexed does not mean it's predatory. It just means that it could mean that the journal is just not there yet. No strategy for handling misconduct, no strategy for digital preservation, right? So these factors, if they manifest, it doesn't mean the journal is predatory. If all of them manifest, probably the journal is predatory. But we have to distinguish between journals that are truly deceptive and journals that are just not of the same high standard. So there are also other support organizations out there that also provide information about what to look out for and how to identify a journal in which to publish. So we use the Scopus selection criteria as basically a gold list of these are the qualities of journals. This is what we look out for. If you look at a journal in the same way, you will automatically avoid selecting a journal that is predatory, right? So looking at the website and noticing all of these factors is important. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want to make you aware of other services that are provided. This is Editage with a very nice, steps that you can follow. So, checking the contact information, checking the scope of the journal, noticing who's on the editorial board. If you should recognize people that are on the editorial board, because they would be publishing or well known within your field of research. Notice things about the fees that are being charged. Notice what the quality of the articles look like. Look out for whether they're mentioning a peer review process, what indexing is being done, what is the retraction policy, all of these things. Look out for this when you are selecting a journal. Automatically, you will avoid a predatory selection, right? Another very useful website. It's a non-profit organization. Think, Check, Submit also provides guidance to researchers about publishing, and they also have steps that you can follow when you are selecting a journal. So they are not saying, don't do this. They are saying, these are the steps that you should take when you are looking for a journal in which to publish, right? So they guide you through some questions like, is this journal the right fit for my work? Does the topic match the journal scope, for example? So your topic, you would have to fit your topic into that scope, for example. So this is also a website that that we can recommend. Okay. So practically, what can researchers do to avoid it? So the default position, first of all, is when approached to submit a paper to any journal is to be suspicious, because this is very unlikely to happen from a legitimate journal, right? So be suspicious when you get an invitation, and then look out for the telltale signs that we've mentioned now: the too broad scope, the spelling errors, the branding, the false metrics, vague information, where you can't verify who's the editor-in-chief, who are the researchers on the editorial board, etc. You can also, if unsure, speak to a senior colleague, somebody, a scholar, a librarian, for advice to broaden your selection of journals in which you can publish. So don't go with an invitation that you receive via email. As a general rule, also publish in the top journals in your field. So this would mean, if you follow this, you would have to get to know your journals, and you would have to know how to read a journal website, as I've done now, given some examples of what to look out for to know whether a journal is of a high quality. The aims and the scopes, very important. The ethical publication statement, very important, right? And these journals typically would also be indexed in Scopus, but also in Web of Science and other, too many to mention, but the Journal Directory of Open Access Journals, for example, they also have a criteria that you have to comply with. So check within these indexes whether the journal has been indexed. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there is a dilemma in terms of using lists. So lists of predatory journals, I mean. So there are numerous lists of predatory journals, and none of them can seem to keep up because it is such a big problem. But there is the Beals list, there is Cabell's, which is a subscription, and I'm not saying these are not good lists, but it is, the problem with these lists is that, let me show you in the next slide. So this is a study that was published also in Nature, that found that there are more than 90 lists of predatory journals. So to be really sure, if you want to use a list, there are 90 lists that you can choose from. So this makes it very difficult. Each of these lists have a different way of looking at what is predatory. So our practical advice is that you can rely on white lists, in the sense of those lists that have a curation process, where the journals have to comply with certain selection criteria, instead of trying to keep up with all the different lists that are out there. And I don't mean that these lists are not good. It's just in a more practical way of doing this is to rely. If a journal in which you want to publish is not indexed in the list, then you have to really use the information, as we've mentioned in this session now, to look out for those signs of the journal being predatory. So then you just have to do a lot more homework before you submit your manuscript. Right. So many checklists about that are available, but this is almost an impractical strategy to follow. So in conclusion, is to know the signs, right? So to know what are the red flags, all the red flags that we've mentioned, the email, solicitation, etc. Know the signs, and then select your journal in which you want to publish based on matching your topic and if you look at the aims and the scope and you use the criteria that we've discussed, making note of whether the journal is being peer reviewed, does it have a editorial board that is recognizable or verifiable, going through all of those criteria, but selecting the best journal for based on your article, not the first journal that reaches out to you and asks you for your manuscript. So this is a second important step, and then is to rely on those journals that are already in reputable indexes. Can save you a lot of time. Right, so this is in conclusion. The slides that we will make available as well. So there's a lot of references or resources mentioned, and then also a lot of references, too many to mention now. So I think with that, we can go to the Q&A and see if there are any questions. Thanks. Just stop sharing. So I noticed, Samuel, there's Samuel has a question. Are there authorities or software to check or block predatory journals or raise red flags? Right, so that is a good question, because your publishing is not regulated. There's no one organization that is the boss of publishing. It's not regulated. So in that sense, there are no authorities that do this, that will do this. So instead, what we have is, academic organizations or organizations like journal indexes, where it is very concerning for them to have high quality journals within their service that would look into journals and would try to make sure that those journals are not listed within their indexes or within their lists of journals that they provide. So yeah, it's a very good question, because as I mentioned, there's no international, global, national regulation. There is an organization, COPE, the Committee of Publication Ethics. This is an organization that looks out for ethical behavior within publication. As far as I know, they don't have any authority in terms of that they can do something about that. But they do provide guidance, advice about what is ethical within publishing. But yeah, they can't really do anything to these publishers. So thanks a lot for that question. And then Percy also has a question. My manuscript was published in a predatory journal. Can I use the same data to publish in an accredited journal? This is a difficult question to answer. It would depend on the journal, the second journal now, the legitimate journal to which you are submitting to. You have to declare that you have published this journal elsewhere and just explain the situation. And in many cases, the legitimate journal will understand and it will accept the journal. But you have to be upfront about what happened. Can we differentiate between predatory and new journals? Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes a new journal, and I'm guessing you mean inexperienced journals, so they don't have their website, with all the information provided, etc. So it would be a little bit difficult to do that. But as I mentioned in the session, predatory is basically a technical thing. A journal is definitely predatory when it is taking money and it is not providing services. So you can't look at a new journal website and just based on the fact that all the information is not there, etc., that the journal is predatory. You'll have to look a little bit deeper, and that is also why within Scopus, we are sensitive for this, because the word predatory is thrown around a lot, but it could also happen to a legitimate journal, and that would be really devastating to them. So we always look for evidence, and the evidence the most conclusive evidence is in terms of that money making that happens without providing any services. So I hope that answers your question. Let me just check the chat if there are any questions in the chat. Oh, okay. So what are there is a question there. What are the dangers of an academic being invited to be a reviewer to a journal that later gets flagged or predatory? So this is, at least if the journal is doing peer reviewing, then it's fine. Then it's probably not, it won't be predatory. So because this is one of the most crucial factors that are usually missing, is that they're charging an article processing cost, but they're not doing peer review or any other services. So if they are doing peer review and you're reviewing for them, that otherwise than that, if it was found later to be predatory, I don't think there will be a consequence to the reviewer. I've never heard of that. So yeah, so there's a question from Jennifer as well. So I think it's the same, Jennifer. So if the journal is doing peer review, that's a good sign. Then it's probably not a predatory journal. So I think you can just take a look at the website as well. Make sure that you know the editorial board is, what type of peer review will you be expected to do. Just check the website that everything is nice and clear, and transparent, then it should be fine. But if it's doing peer review, almost by definition, it won't be a predatory journal. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So in that case, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I hope this was useful. We will be making the recording available on the Africa Success portal, so take a look there, and then also join us for our next sessions. So coming up on the 6th of November, we'll be talking about the peer review process. So please join us. Thanks, everyone, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.